Jenny gave up America for Sumit. She left behind the country she knew, moved halfway across the world, dealt with years of family rejection, survived one shocking revelation after another, and built her entire life around the idea that if she loved this man hard enough, eventually all of those sacrifices would make sense. And for a while, it looked like they did. Jenny and Sumit got married. His family slowly became less hostile toward their relationship. The couple who once looked completely impossible somehow stayed together. But now, everything has changed. Jenny is facing alls. Her health situation has completely changed what she needs from the people around her. Her family wants her back in the United States for medical care. And the person she may need beside her for that journey is Sumit. And suddenly, after years of building their life in India, Sumit is trying to get a US visa. So of course, viewers have one huge question. Why now? Why does America suddenly become an option at the exact moment Jenny becomes more physically vulnerable? Is this proof that critics were right to question Sumit's motives all along? Or are people taking an extremely painful medical situation and twisting a completely reasonable caregiving decision into another 90-day fiancé conspiracy? Because once you separate what has actually been confirmed from what people are saying online, this story becomes much more complicated. And honestly, the visa itself may not even be the biggest red flag here. The bigger question is whether Jenny can trust Sumit to finally become the stable, transparent, dependable partner she needs at the most serious moment of her life. Because if you really look at their history, the problem was never just where they were going to live. The problem has always been what Jenny finds out after Sumit has already made the decision. And that pattern is what makes the situation so uncomfortable. First, let's deal with the part that has created all of this suspicion. Jenny's family has publicly talked about trying to get Sumit to the United States so he can accompany her. The reason being discussed publicly is not some secret permanent residency plan. The immediate issue is that Jenny's health has changed. Her daughter Christina has said they are trying to find a temporary route that would allow Sumit to travel with Jenny because doctors reportedly don't want Jenny making that long trip by herself. And that matters because there is a massive difference between saying Sumit is trying to accompany his sick wife to America and saying Sumit suddenly discovered a green card opportunity. Those are not the same story. And this is where I think some of the online conversation has gotten way ahead of the facts. People hear the words Sumit, America, and visa in the same sentence, and immediately they start building a theory. And I understand why. This is 90-Day Fiancé. This is a franchise built around immigration questions, cultural conflict, financial motives, family suspicion, and people constantly wondering who really loves whom. And Sumit doesn't exactly have a perfect history when it comes to transparency, so I understand why viewers are suspicious. But suspicion is not evidence, and if we are going to question Sumit, I think there are much stronger things to question him about than simply saying he wants to travel with Jenny. Think about what America represents in this relationship. For years, America basically represented something Sumit did not need. India was his home. His parents were there, his culture was there, his entire support system was there. And Jenny was the person who adapted. Jenny was the one who moved. Jenny was the one who adjusted. Jenny was the one who kept saying, in one way or another, fine, if this is what it takes to be with you, I'll make it work. Now look at the situation today. America doesn't just represent another country anymore. For Jenny, America represents family. It represents access to people she has known her entire life. It potentially represents medical resources and insurance. It represents a support network that becomes much more important when someone is facing a serious progressive illness. So the circumstances have changed. And that's why I don't think Sumit's previous resistance to America automatically proves hypocrisy. In fact, let me flip the argument. Imagine if Jenny's health situation changed this dramatically and Sumit still said no. I don't care what your doctors say. I don't care what your daughters want. I don't care what kind of support you might have in America. I am not leaving India. Wouldn't people criticize him for that too? Wouldn't viewers say, this woman gave up everything for you, and now you won't even get on a plane for her? That's why the situation is more complicated than the easiest clickbait interpretation. Sometimes changing your mind is hypocrisy. Sometimes changing your mind means the facts changed. And this time the facts absolutely changed. But that does not mean Sumit gets a free pass. Because the real issue isn't whether he is willing to go to America. The real issue is whether Jenny can trust how he handles the decisions that come next. And that brings us to the part of their history that I think matters much more. Sumit has a very long pattern of avoiding uncomfortable truth until the truth becomes impossible to avoid. This relationship literally began with deception. He originally approached Jenny under a fake identity. That alone would be enough for most people to say, "I'm done." But Jenny stayed. Then came the massive complication involving his arranged marriage. Again, Jenny had to deal with a reality that was far more complicated than what she thought she was signing up for. And through all of that, Sumit repeatedly found himself caught between what he wanted and what he was terrified to confront. Jenny versus his family, his marriage versus his parents, his personal choices versus cultural expectations, his desire for independence versus the financial reality of actually creating that independence. That is a pattern. And here's the important part. A pattern does not mean every new accusation about Sumit is automatically true. It means viewers have a legitimate reason to ask whether the same coping style keeps showing up in different situations. And that coping style appears to be this. When Sumit is afraid of confrontation, he delays, he hides, he tries to manage the situation himself. He hopes somehow everything will work itself out before Jenny has to know the full truth. And then, eventually, the truth comes out anyway. That is exactly why the recent money situation matters so much. Because in the latest chapter of their story, Sumit revealed that he had taken out roughly $15,000 to $20,000 in loans without Jenny fully understanding what was going on. And to me, that is a much more serious present-day trust issue than simply trying to get a visa. Because couples get into debt. Businesses struggle. Families go through financial crises. People borrow money when they're scared. None of that automatically makes someone a bad husband. But taking on a major financial obligation and not being fully transparent with your spouse, that's different. Because debt doesn't just affect the person signing the paperwork. It affects the marriage. It affects housing. It affects future plans. It affects how much freedom both people have. And when one spouse is already living far away from most of her original support system, financial secrecy becomes even more serious. That is why Jenny's reaction to the debt confession felt bigger than just, "Oh wow, you borrowed money." It hit a much older wound. She has spent years learning things after the decision was already made. And I think that is the real question sitting underneath everything happening now. Has Sumit actually learned how to be transparent with Jenny? Or has he simply gotten better at surviving the fallout after she finds things out? Because those are two very different things. And if you're Jenny, that distinction matters more now than it ever has before. Before her diagnosis, a bad financial decision could lead to an argument. A hidden debt could delay moving out. A disagreement with his family could make the house uncomfortable. But now, every decision has more weight. Where do they live? Who is helping Jenny? How much money do they have? Can they afford travel? Can they afford treatment? Which family members are nearby? What happens if Sumit can enter the United States temporarily but cannot remain there as long as Jenny needs him? What happens if Jenny's care needs become more complicated? Those are not reality television problems. Those are real-life logistics. And that's where this relationship is about to be tested in a completely different way. For years, Jenny and Sumit were fighting for permission to be together. Now they have to prove they actually know how to function together when the problem isn't somebody else trying to break them up. And that difference is huge. Because think about how much of their story was built around outside enemies. His parents don't approve. Society doesn't approve. People judge the age gap. Jenny's family has concerns. Everybody is against them. That kind of pressure can actually bond a couple together. When it's you and me against the world, every problem has a villain. But what happens when the biggest problems are inside the relationship? What happens when the issue is no longer Sumit's mom saying no? What happens when the issue is money, communication, caregiving, exhaustion, fear? Dependence? Those problems don't disappear because you're in love. And I think this is why so many viewers are divided about Sumit right now. There is definitely a section of the audience that believes he genuinely loves Jenny. And honestly, there is evidence in their long history that helps explain why people feel that way. This relationship has lasted far longer than most people expected. Sumit eventually married her despite enormous pressure from his family. He stood by the relationship when walking away probably would have made his life easier. And now, by the family's public account, he is helping care for Jenny as her condition changes. So when some fans look at them, they don't see a man who has been running a 15-year immigration scam. They see two people who built a deeply unconventional relationship and are now facing something devastating together. But there is another group of viewers that basically says, I believe he loves her, I just don't trust his decisions. And to me, that is probably the most interesting position, because love and reliability are not the same thing. You can love someone deeply and still be terrible at money. You can love someone and still avoid difficult conversations. You can love someone and still make decisions without them because you convince yourself you're protecting them. You can love someone and still have patterns that eventually damage the person you're trying to keep. And Sumit's history makes that possibility difficult to ignore. Then you have another section of the audience that is much more suspicious. They look at the timing of the visa. They look at the crowdfunding. They look at the financial problems. They look at Jenny's age and declining health. And they ask whether Sumit is suddenly looking at America differently because his circumstances are becoming more difficult in India. That theory is absolutely part of the conversation. But here's where I would push back. Questioning the situation is fair. Declaring the motive as fact is not. There is a giant difference between saying the timing makes me uncomfortable and saying he is definitely using her. We simply don't have proof for that second statement. And I think the online conversation becomes less useful when every uncomfortable detail gets forced into the darkest possible theory. Because there is already enough real material here to analyze. We don't need to invent a villain. Let's talk about Jenny's position for a minute, because I think her side of this story is actually more emotionally complicated than the visa debate. Jenny spent years insisting that she was choosing this life. People warned her, her daughters had concerns, viewers had concerns, Sumit's family definitely had concerns, and Jenny's response again and again was basically, this is my life. I know what I'm doing. I love him. And there is something very powerful about that. Jenny did make choices. She wasn't dragged to India. She wasn't forced to stay. She kept choosing the relationship. But one of the hardest things about life is that a choice can feel completely different when your circumstances change. Living thousands of miles from your daughters is one thing when you're healthy enough to travel. Living with your husband's family is one thing when your biggest frustration is privacy. Financial instability is one thing when you still feel physically independent. But illness changes the meaning of all of those things. Suddenly, geography matters more. Money matters more. Language matters more. Transportation matters more. Insurance matters more. Family proximity matters more. And caregiving becomes central. That doesn't mean Jenny made the wrong decision by moving to India. It means decisions have consequences we can't always predict when we make them. And that's why I think the saddest part of this story is not that Jenny was supposedly trapped. I don't think that is supported by what we know. The sadder and more interesting reality is that Jenny spent years building her life around Sumit's world. And now her health may require the marriage to completely reorganize itself around her needs. That is a huge test. For years, the question was, how much is Jenny willing to sacrifice to be with Sumit? Now the question becomes, how much is Sumit willing to change for Jenny? And those are not the same thing. Jenny moved countries. Would Sumit do the same, even temporarily? Jenny dealt with family rejection. Can Sumit deal with becoming the outsider around Jenny's family? Jenny adapted to his culture. Can he adapt if their medical reality pushes them toward America? Jenny accepted uncertainty again and again. Can Sumit now provide stability when she has less ability to absorb chaos? That is where this story gets deeper. And then there is Sumit's family. Because for years, his mother was one of the biggest characters in this relationship, even when she wasn't physically in the room. Her rejection shaped everything. The family conflict shaped everything. Jenny wanted acceptance. Sumit wanted his parents and his wife somehow existing in the same universe without constantly forcing him to choose. Eventually, that relationship shifted. His family became more accepting. Jenny and Sumit even ended up living with his parents. And here's the irony. They spent years believing family acceptance would fix everything. Then they finally got some version of acceptance and discovered that acceptance does not automatically create independence. Jenny has talked publicly about wanting her independent life back. That is such an important detail because it shows how much this relationship has evolved. At one point, she wanted his family simply to stop fighting them. Then they stopped fighting them as aggressively. And another problem emerged. Living together. Boundaries, privacy, money, independence. That's what long-term relationships are actually like. You solve one problem and discover the next one. And in this case, the next one may be much harder. Because Sumit is not just Jenny's husband. He is also a son in a family structure where parental obligation has always carried enormous emotional weight. Jenny, meanwhile, has often wanted the marriage itself to become the primary unit. Just the two of them. Their house, their choices, their life. And neither of those positions automatically makes someone evil. But when resources are limited, those priorities collide. If Sumit is helping his parents financially, what does that mean for Jenny's medical needs? If Jenny needs to remain close to her daughters, what does that mean for Sumit's obligations in India? If they need to spend money on international travel? Where does that money come from? If Sumit cannot work under whatever temporary immigration status he eventually receives, how do they support themselves? Those are the questions I think will define the next stage of their relationship. Not some dramatic theory that he is going to get off the plane in America and immediately disappear. Could their marriage eventually fail? Of course. Any marriage can. Could caregiving create resentment? Absolutely, that happens in relationships everywhere, and it is not something people like talking about because it sounds cruel. But caregiving can be exhausting. It can change intimacy, it can change finances, it can change roles, it can change how both people see themselves. And with Jenny and Sumit, there is another layer because their age difference was always one of the biggest issues surrounding the relationship. For years, the age gap was treated almost like a social argument. Can these two really be compatible? Will his parents ever accept an older American woman? What will people think? Can this relationship last? Now the age gap is no longer just an abstract future conversation. The health crisis has made caregiving real. And again, Alls is not something caused by their age difference. That distinction matters, but the situation does force them to confront the kind of caregiving imbalance that many viewers assumed might eventually become part of a relationship with such a large age gap. And I think Sumit's response to that will tell us much more about his character than any rumor ever could. If he becomes more transparent, more practical, more financially responsible, and more willing to make difficult sacrifices for Jenny, that will matter. If he continues hiding major decisions until they explode, that will matter too. Because here's another thing I don't think gets discussed enough. Jenny's health situation means Sumit's avoidance pattern is no longer just irritating. It could become genuinely destabilizing. If you're dealing with medical appointments, insurance paperwork, visas, travel arrangements, housing decisions, and family coordination, you cannot constantly wait until the last minute to tell your partner what is happening. You need a system. You need honesty. You need planning. You need to know what money exists and what money doesn't. You need to know who is responsible for what. You need to know what happens if plan A fails. And Sumit has not always shown that kind of planning. He has shown emotion. He has shown attachment. He has shown persistence. He has shown a willingness to stay in the relationship. But organization and transparency, those are much more questionable. And that's why the hidden debt matters so much to this current situation. It raises the exact wrong question at the exact wrong time. If Jenny has to depend on Sumit more, can she depend on the information he gives her? Because financial secrecy changes how safe a marriage feels. Imagine thinking you are planning your next move based on one financial reality, only to learn your spouse has tens of thousands of dollars in obligations you didn't fully know about. That affects trust. And when Jenny becomes angry, I don't think she's only reacting to that one moment. Sometimes people say, why is she so mad? He borrowed money because he was struggling. But frustration builds history. Jenny isn't only hearing, I have debt. She may also be hearing every other time she felt like information arrived too late. That's why relationships can have arguments that seem much bigger than the immediate event. The argument is never just about the money. It's about what the money represents. In this case, it represents being left out. It represents lack of control. It represents uncertainty. And for Jenny, uncertainty has basically been the cost of loving Sumit from the beginning. Now let's talk about the fan reaction, because I think this is where the conversation gets especially interesting. Some fans are incredibly sympathetic toward both of them right now. They see Jenny's diagnosis and immediately stop caring about all the old 90-day drama. They're looking at two people dealing with something devastating. And many viewers who used to criticize this relationship now say things like, whatever I thought about them before, I hope they get through this. That is understandable. There is a human reality here that is much bigger than television. But other fans are saying the illness does not erase Sumit's history. And they're right about that too. Compassion does not require pretending every past problem disappeared. You can feel terrible for what Jenny and Sumit are going through and still say, this couple has unresolved trust issues. Both can be true. Another group is focused almost entirely on money. They are questioning the loans. They're questioning the crowdfunding. They're questioning whether the couple has enough resources for the kind of support Jenny could eventually need. And again, those are fair questions as long as they stay connected to what is actually known. Where I think things become unfair is when financial struggle immediately gets translated into financial exploitation. Those are not the same thing. People can be broke and still love each other. People can make terrible financial decisions and still love each other. People can ask for help and still be genuine. The question is whether they are being transparent. And that's the standard I would keep coming back to with Sumit. Not is every decision secretly evil, but is Jenny getting the truth early enough to make her own decisions? That is a much more useful question. Because Jenny's autonomy matters. And autonomy does not only mean physically being able to leave the house. Autonomy means access to information. It means knowing the financial reality. It means understanding the immigration options. It means being included in medical decisions. It means being able to communicate with her daughters. It means having choices. And as her health changes, protecting those choices becomes more important. That is why I would be very careful with the dramatic rumors claiming Jenny is basically helpless, abandoned, and trapped. Jenny and Sumit have publicly pushed back against the idea that she is completely bedridden or unable to communicate. That doesn't mean her diagnosis isn't serious. It means we should not exaggerate her condition beyond what she and her family have actually said. Because turning a sick woman into a helpless character for drama strips away exactly the autonomy people claim to be worried about. And I think that's worth saying. There is enough reality here. We don't need to create a horror movie around it. So, what happens next? The most obvious pressure point is the visa. If Sumit gets permission to travel, that opens one set of questions. How long can he stay? What kind of support will Jenny have in America? Where will they live? How much responsibility will fall on Jenny's daughters? How does Sumit function away from his own family network? And does living in America temporarily create new tension between him and Jenny? Because remember, Sumit has spent years in an environment where he understands the culture, the language, the family expectations, and the system. Jenny was the outsider. In America, those roles could reverse. Jenny has history there. Jenny has family there. Jenny understands the environment. Sumit could become the dependent spouse. That role reversal could reveal a lot. Would he adapt the way Jenny did? Would he become homesick? Would he feel controlled? Would he suddenly understand some of the isolation Jenny experienced in India? That could become one of the most fascinating parts of their story. The second pressure point is money. Medical crises have a way of exposing every weakness in a financial plan. If they were already struggling before, those struggles are unlikely to magically disappear. And if Sumit has outstanding debt, that makes transparency even more important. I think future conflict is much more likely to come from questions like spending, housing, family support, and work than from some dramatic moment where he suddenly reveals a secret master plan. The third pressure point is caregiving. We don't know exactly how Jenny's condition will progress or what specific support she will need at every stage, and we should not pretend we do. But the couple themselves have acknowledged that she needs more help. That means Sumit's role is changing. He is no longer just the younger husband defending an unconventional romance. He may increasingly be the person coordinating daily support, and that comes with responsibility. The fourth pressure point is family geography. Jenny has daughters in America. Sumit has parents in India. There may come a point where the best location for Jenny is not the best location for Sumit. And unlike their earlier family fights, there may not be a compromise that makes everybody happy. What happens if Jenny wants to stay near her daughters long term? What happens if Sumit wants to return to India? What happens if his visa is temporary but Jenny's medical needs are not? That is the kind of conflict that could genuinely reshape this marriage. And I think that's why this story is so compelling without any conspiracy. Their relationship has always been about sacrifice, but the direction of the sacrifice may finally be reversing. Jenny spent years moving toward Sumit. Now Sumit may have to move toward Jenny. Jenny spent years proving she could survive inside his world. Now Sumit may have to prove he can rebuild his world around her needs. And that is where his character is going to be tested. Not by whether he cries in a video, not by whether he says the perfect thing online, not even by whether he gets the visa. The real test is what happens after the dramatic moment. Does he communicate? Does he plan? Does he tell Jenny the truth even when the truth makes him look bad? Does he make financial decisions with her instead of for her? Does he help keep her connected to her daughters? Does he prioritize her care when that priority conflicts with what his family wants? Those are the questions that matter. And I want to be fair to Sumit here. People are complicated. A man can have a history of deception and still genuinely love his wife. A person can have terrible conflict avoidance habits and still step up during a crisis. Someone can make irresponsible financial decisions and later become more responsible. People do change. The problem is that change has to be demonstrated, and Sumit has reached a moment where words probably won't be enough anymore, because Jenny has already heard a lot of promises. She has already taken a lot of risks. She has already given him more chances than most viewers ever would. At this stage, dependability is the love language that matters, and that might be the biggest shift in their entire relationship. Their early story asked, will Sumit choose Jenny over his parents? Their middle story asked, will these two ever actually build a stable marriage? Now the question is much more serious. Can Sumit become the person Jenny can safely depend on? And I don't think we have the answer yet. I also don't think the answer is automatically no. That is where I disagree with the darkest version of the online conversation. I don't think the evidence we have proves this is some long-term immigration scheme. I don't think we have enough evidence to say Sumit's mother is secretly threatening Jenny over a visa. I don't think we have enough evidence to say Sumit plans to abandon her the second he reaches America. Those theories may get clicks, but they're not the most interesting part of the story. The real story is already complicated enough. A woman gave up her home country for a relationship everyone told her would fail. The relationship survived, but the price of that choice is being reevaluated under circumstances nobody could have predicted. A man spent years insisting India was his home. Now his wife's health may require him to leave. A couple spent years fighting external enemies. Now they have to face money, illness, dependence, geography, and trust. And none of those problems can be solved by proving somebody wrong on television. This is where Jenny and Sumit's relationship stops being a fairy tale about beating the odds and becomes a test of what those vows actually mean when life gets ugly. So when people ask me, is Sumit's sudden interest in America suspicious? My answer is this. The timing is absolutely worth discussing. His history absolutely gives viewers reasons to question how he handles major decisions. The hidden debt is a real red flag. The pattern of delayed disclosure is a real problem. Jenny's loss of independence is a real concern. Their financial instability is a real concern. The complications surrounding caregiving and family are very real. But none of that is proof that he is using Jenny for a visa. And I think reducing everything to that theory actually lets Sumit off the hook for the more important questions. Because if you say he's either a scammer or he's innocent, you miss the entire middle. Maybe Sumit genuinely loves Jenny and still has serious problems with honesty. Maybe he wants to help her and is also overwhelmed. Maybe he wants to go to America because she needs him there, while also recognizing that America could create opportunities for him. Human motives are rarely one thing. That's what makes relationships interesting. And that's what makes this moment so important. Jenny does not need Sumit to prove that every critic on the internet was wrong. She needs him to be reliable. She needs him to be transparent. She needs him to make decisions with her. She needs him to help create stability when her world is becoming less predictable. For years, their love story was about whether love could survive rejection. Now it's about whether love can survive responsibility. And responsibility is much harder. So, I want to know what you think. Does Sumit's sudden willingness to go to America make you suspicious after all those years of building his life around India? Or do you think Jenny's All's diagnosis completely explains why his position has changed? And more importantly, after everything Jenny gave up to build a life with Sumit, do you think he now has an obligation to build the next chapter around what she needs? Because to me, that is the real question. Not whether Sumit wants a visa. Whether Jenny can finally trust that when the next major decision comes, she won't be the last person to find out.